In January 1981, a strange, unidentified flying object descended on a farm in France. The property was located near the village of Trans-en-Provence in the Var region in southeastern France. While thousands of UFO sightings have been reported over the decades, what makes this case truly unique is the amount of physical evidence left behind. Even more so, much of the evidence collected was analyzed but left scientists baffled. As a result, this case has been called by some as the most credible close encounter of the second kind in modern history. In this episode, we will explore the Trans-en-Provence UFO sighting. On the afternoon of January 8, 1981, a farmer named Bernardo Nicolai, then aged 55, was working on his farm when he would hear a strange noise that sounded like whistling. As he turned around, he saw a craft hovering in the air. Oddly, the craft was whistling, and there was no smoke or flames or anything underneath the ship. Nicolai would describe the UFO like many have. It was in the form of two saucers upside down, one against the other. The craft was smaller than most sightings, being only around 5 feet high. The object was silver and had a border running around the circumference of it. Nicolai said there were two circles which looked like doors. In addition, they appeared to be 2 feet protruding from the bottom, extending around 8 inches beneath the ship. The craft was hovering just over a pine tree toward the end of its property. The stunned farmer would see the craft was not leaving, but was descending toward the ground. As this was occurring, Nicolai began walking toward the craft. The UFO would eventually settle down in an area just in front of his small cabin. As Nicolai got closer, the whistling sound intensified. At that time, Nicolai was around 100 feet from where the object had landed. It then began to ascend and reach the height of the pine trees. At that point, it stopped momentarily and then suddenly shot off into the distance. After it disappeared, Nicolai walked toward the landing spot closer and noticed a circle around 7 feet in diameter. While the sighting was surely fascinating, what happened next was really intriguing. Nicolai believed the craft was an experimental military device as he lived near a military base, so he notified local police that day. The police would come out and interview Nicolai as well as collect soil samples around the landing site. It's important to point out this occurred within 24 hours of the sighting. The police would then notify Japan on January 12th, just 4 days after the event occurred. Japan is an unidentified aerospace phenomenon study group which was established in 1977 within the National Center for Space Studies. During this time, the police and the UFO group were cooperating with one another. The UFO group would send out one of their own UFO investigators to analyze the landing site and speak with Nicolai. The lead investigator on the case was Jean-Jacques Velasco. After Velasco and his team collected soil samples and other vegetation from the landing site, they would be sent to several government laboratories. Some of these included the Sneed Laboratory, Toulouse University, and University of Metz. As they tested the soil and vegetation against a nearby control sample, the scientists were astounded by the results. Perhaps the scientist that examined and discussed his findings the most was Michel Bonnat. Bonnat told a French magazine in 1983 named François that the leaves all had the characteristics of a young age, but they presented the biochemical characteristics of leaves at an advanced stage. He went on to say that the biochemical characteristics of those leaves don't resemble anything on planet Earth. Furthermore, in a scientific report published in the Journal of Scientific Exploration, Bunal concluded that something unusual had occurred on that day. Other laboratories would reach the same conclusion as to the perplexing results of the chemical analysis on the soil and the leaves. For example, it was determined the chlorophyll pigment in leaf samples was weakened from 50% to 30%. The younger leaves stood the most serious losses. Scientists were also able to determine that the soil had been heated to an extreme heat somewhere in the range of 300 to 600 degrees Fahrenheit. In addition, the ground had been compressed by a pressure of around 4 to 5 tons. Some criticized this specific finding, since this could have been caused by a vehicle. Researchers also point out that the strange findings were not consistent with nuclear radiation. They would go on to speculate that another type of energy source must have been responsible for the strange, perplexing findings. In particular, it is thought the aged leaves and strange findings in the dirt samples could have been caused by the emission of some type of electromagnetic field. One other interesting, unique characteristic of this case is that traces were still able to be found 40 days after the event. This gave ample time for samples to be collected and sent to various laboratories throughout France. What can we make of this case? Popular Mechanics, a magazine, called the case perhaps the most completely and carefully documented sighting of all time. In this video, we've just discussed the highlights of the scientific findings. There was extensive analysis done by multiple research institutions, and to date none have been able to explain the discrepancies in the data. In addition, there was a witness who identified the craft. Although it was only one witness, the combination of his eyewitness testimony as well as the mysterious findings provide support that this event did indeed occur. There's been many cases around the world where either lights or strange craft have been seen, and then, in the ensuing days, vegetation is affected. Perhaps the most famous of these are crop circles. Although quickly dismissed as a hoax, some crop circles display features that simply cannot be man-made. In sum, this case appears to have much scientific evidence supporting that something abnormal happened on that afternoon in January 1981. As more and more UFO sightings occur, it should be the case that we will see more and more phenomena like this that can't be explained by modern science.